Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So let's talk about the topic for today related to the third eye chakra in the physical way, in the physical body. With our planet for today, which is Neptune. Sorry, I'm a little bit low and slow. Nothing wrong. It's all okay. It's just that today I'm slow and I need to breathe much more. So that's it. To begin with everything, Neptune. Let's talk about this planet and this god. The god, the planet Neptune takes its name from the Roman god Neptune, that most of the people know with the name of the Greek tradition, which is Poseidon. Poseidon is the brother of Zeus, and Poseidon is the god of the seas, the oceans. So that's why usually we know the story of Poseidon more than Neptune, but it's the same person. The name Neptune was named like this by the Etruscan people. The Etruscan people lived in the Italic peninsula way before the Romans had arrived. So these people are part of the Indo-European cultures that came from Kazakhstan. Remember that all the Indo-European people came from the flatlands of the Kazakh, and from there they went to Europe and also down to to Iran, to all the countries named with Stan in the last part, and India, and so on. So okay, so in those languages, in those cultures, they called water as Nepa. Nepa. Nepa is water, and Nepita is something that humidity. Humidity and wet. That's the meaning of Nepita. So humidity and wet. And the Etruscan people used to call, when they say someone or the one who, they use the name one, which is unus. So unus, the one that does this. So Nepitunus is the name of the one related to the water, the one that is wet, the one blah blah. Okay, so that is Nepitunus. So that's the origin of the name of Neptune. So the reason why we have these gods of water, god of fire, is because in the beginning of our humanity, the idea was not having a god outside that created everything. It was different. The idea of the ancient one is that every water shaped a god. Is the opposite. For example, you have the ocean, you have the rivers, you have the ocean, rivers, lakes, steam, all this kind of different elements of water, but they all create the water itself as one. Okay, so it's because of this that they create a unity, a being that represents all the waters. So they call that the divinity of the water. So in the past times, the divine was not the divine was not something outside that created matter. The divine was the matter itself unified by one attribute. Okay, is the opposite to what we now believe about the gods. So a point that I guess is important to understand when we speak about gods and these different beings, I guess it's great to understand that what we are trying to do now, talking about the gods and the attributes of this divinity, of Neptune and Zeus and so on. I am not really. We are not the. Sorry. I'm trying to put all the idea that I said before in Spanish. So when we speak about this, we are not talking about aliens or the Anunnaki that came and did things and so on, and the people consider them gods of water, gods of. No, we are not talking about that story. Okay, we are talking about concepts. So talking about concepts, we have to remember that the people in the past did exactly the same as we are trying to do now. They took different things from the earth, from the reality, and they put a concept on it, creating one being from that object. So from all the waters, they create the concept of the divinity of the water. And this is not something, and this is something really old. So what we are doing now, speaking about the concepts of the gods, is exactly the same. Today we speak about archetypes. So we are speaking about the archetypes of the zodiac signs, the archetype of the planets, and so on. We are not speaking about gods specifically, people or being that were there in the sky. We're talking about archetypes of our life with emotions and so on. So in the very beginning, the humans did exactly the same. They didn't believe in gods. They put archetypes, but the way in which they understood the archetypes is to describe that those things has an inner light that they share. So they have a light within that they have to share, and they all share together, like all the waters share the same light and so on. So light in the ancient language, you would say Dieu, and from Dieu it comes Dewa, and Dewa creates the name of day, which is the day, the light. Okay, and also it creates the word divine, Dewa, divine. Okay, so a divinity, a god, is basically describing the light that objects has all together, the meaning of all the things together. Then with history, they created the images of these gods, and they started to honor the images of these gods. But in the very beginning, they were doing exactly the same as we are doing today, which is honoring the archetypes. So maybe in the future, because we call them archetypes, maybe because of the Mason people that were architects, we would call the gods like architects, the ones that build the reality. So for what we do today, speaking about these archetypes, creating the concepts of our reality, is the same thing that people in the past did with the gods. So we are not speaking about Anunnaki and all these people when we are talking about gods. We are just talking about the archetypes of them. So this is why when we speak about the god of Neptune, we are not going to speak about the god. We are going to speak about what this god is representing. So I will make this question that I don't know if I'm doing the right question, but my question is, have you ever thought through astrology why we give to this planet, to Neptune, the attributes of the ocean, the deep emotions, the water that is under? If this planet is not hadn't been discovered until mid 1800s, so the 19th century. I don't know if you get the question, but it's about that. Is why would we use it? Why would we say it represents the waters, the deep waters, the ocean, because it's Neptune, if the planet was discovered 200 years ago and was named by someone that wouldn't use astrology? To understand why we relate Neptune with the waters and the deep and the deep how to say all the attributes that we put into Neptune, describing the ocean, describing the deep waters, the emotions, the subconscious of the ocean, and so on. Before that, those concepts existed, but not describing the ocean. In the ancient times, they described the attributes of Neptune, not calling them Neptune, but calling them in a different way. Because in ancient times, they had no idea specifically that those other planets really existed. They had not a name for them specifically. Okay, they had not a name for those planets like we do today. The name of Neptune was decided by astrophysics in the 19th century, so in the 1800s. So before that, nobody called this planet like Neptune. So the space behind Saturn and Uranus, behind this space, they call it the deep space. They call it the deep space that holds everything, because they had no idea what was behind it. They had no idea what was after that. So they put the concept of there is something very deep in the sky that is surrounding us and holding us together, but we cannot see it, we cannot perceive it. It's something so deep and so difficult to understand that is surrounding everything, all our reality, all the stars. Okay, and they start to describe this space like the profound, the place where you can find the whole being hold, okay, all the things together, and it's so huge that you cannot grab it, you cannot take it by yourself. It's so big that it holds you, you cannot handle it. That's the concept of that deep space behind the planets that they knew. in that time. So the attribute of Neptune, of the planet, existed before they discovered the planet, of course. They had a name for it, they have the description for it, of course. But they had not the planet. So in the 1800s, they discovered the planet, and the astrophysics says this planet will be named Neptune. And when they named Neptune to the planet, all this concept of the deep, of the thing that holds, became into an ocean. So it's an analogy to describe the ocean. Okay? So something that was there, that was used, that was known, but now it has a name and it has an analogy. Oh, now we can explain this deep aspect like an ocean because it's Neptune. So this vision of Neptune only has 200 years as an ocean, but it's describing something that before existed and it wasn't described as ocean. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. So with this that I'm explaining about Neptune, is the same for all the rest of the planets. And why? Because usually we have all these planets with names of gods that has these attributes like if they were the gods. But for example, Mars has not Mars has not the energy of war. Mars is the god of war. Ares for the Greek. But this doesn't mean that in Mars there was a species that were warriors, or that Mars is all about fighting and war and so on. It's not related with that. What happened is that the gravity of Mars has this effect in us that pushes forward. That is like, whoa, moved us ahead. So because it's pushing us to do something, we as humans put the attributes of Mars to that energy. And we use the analogy of Mars describing the energy of the planet. So that's why we started to make a decoration of the story of the planet being the war, the warrior, the one that gets mad, and so on. So it's not that this planet means that, is the story or the interpretation that we put in Mars because of the energy that it has. So it's an analogy that helps into our psychology to understand something in the outside. So for example, when we see the water and we see how the water flows and the water shapes the stones on the path. So we say, oh, the water flows and shapes the stones, goes beyond the stones. And that's it. That's the nature. That's how it works. And that's it. There's nothing more there. It's objective. Until we start to describe psychologically the aspects of the water. And we start to say, the water flows and shows us the path. It shows us that we can shape any conflict, any enemy, that we can go beyond, that we can move ahead and transform ourselves in anything we want. So you have to follow the path of the water. And with this example, they create the divinity, the divine of water, and they gave this divine the aspects of flowing and shaping the enemies and going beyond. So we ask to this divine to guide us in the path and shape the conflicts in our life. So as you see, we take the real things of the world, and by psychology and interpretation, we create divinity that we then name like that in the nature. So this is why we project our own psychological ideas in the things that has not the weight for itself. We describe how the things from the outside determine our lives according to our point of view. This is why for some of us, Mars will be the planet that pushes us forward, and for others, Mars would be the planet of war. And all these things that we create and that we perceive from the world is here, inside our head, is in our mind, our perception of the reality. And it is so unlimited, so huge, so big, that it's kind of impossible to handle it. Instead of us using it, it kind of uses us. And it's so big around us, invisible, that we call that subconscious. And this is what Neptune controls. Remember this huge aspect that being invisible holds us, controls us? That's the huge aspect of the subconscious that Neptune gives the shape of an ocean. An ocean is impossible to handle. It's so huge that you cannot control it. So the only thing that you can do in the ocean is to learn how to swim. And that's what the conscious have to do inside the subconscious. You cannot control the subconscious. You can only learn how to swim, how to dive in the subconscious. And where is all this subconscious controlling us? Well, through everything that we do, every action, everything that we experience that is recorded in the memory of our body. And where's the memory? In everything that we move, that we do. And that movement, that action is called emotion. So I wrote today in the blog that emotion is basically the only thing that you, without the need of modifying it, you can feel it within and the outside. Emotion is like the bridge that connects exactly the same, the subconscious within and the conscious outside. You can create an emotion in your brain inside, and it can modify the outside. And also something on the outside can modify some emotion created in the outside can control the inside. So the emotion is the only aspect that doesn't need a modification in order to be inside ourselves. Emotion is the same outside or inside. You can feel it exactly the same. So basically, Neptune is the subconscious, and this subconscious can be created only through the feelings, the sensations. Why is that? Because the whole things that are around us, that controls us, can be only perceived by the five senses. And these five senses are the ones that are received, that receives the information, that decodes the information to be processed in the body. So when you go to sleep, when you are awake, you receive data and data and data. When you go to sleep, you just when you go to sleep, you are processing that information. You are just absorbing that and trying to put all information together. So the cells regenerate with the new data, so it can use it in another day. So during the dreaming process, the oniric moment is the only moment when we directly have contact with the subconscious. So it's during the dreams when all this data is mixed, and in this moment all this information is under the aspect of this aspect is under Neptune, under the subconscious. So all this information that that we absorb during the day, they have no rules. They are free. They go all around. So no time, no space, no physical rules. And this is why all this data starts to mix. This means that in the subconscious, there are no laws for time, no space. And this is the reason why we call this surrealism. Because surrealism is su, which is above reality. Okay? And also, it's outside the structures of reality. Because this is outside the structures of reality, we call it abstracto. So the abstraction and surrealistic abstraction, surrealistic abstraction. Okay, this is the two terms to describe this subconscious. So it's because of the dreams that we can have contact with the divine, with the spiritual world, because the spiritual world is not ruled by the law of physics. So this is why we can relate with the divinity through the dreams. So the subconscious is the one that allows us to see other options, to have intelligence, imagination, to connect with something without limits. So that's what makes us be what we are. So to understand this, what we call spirituality or spiritual is the abstraction of what the reality gives us. In such a way, our body is absorbing information from the environment constantly, and our brain tries to understand it, mixing that in the subconscious. So this abstraction, surreal abstraction that we perceive as the connection with the spirituality, is that process of understanding the things from another way. This is why some people, when they take drugs that makes hallucination, many people can connect with the spiritual world, because by abstraction they are able to connect with this environment of the subconscious. So somehow we can say that everything that we know from the spiritual world is not something real. It's something that is abstract, because spirituality is basically the interpretation that each one of us has. Each one of us has about its own perception of its own existence. So each one of us has a different spirituality. And from now on, whatever we can say of the spiritual world is just that, a perception of my own self. This is what unconditional love is teaching us. So what I am saying right now is that all the information that I am giving comes from my own interpretation of my subconscious. But it's mine. But maybe yours is different, and you will have another way to perceive that information from your own subconscious. The subconscious is the filter of interpretation of spirituality. So the reason why we share, we speak, we learn, we study, we belong to cultures is just to open to make our perception of the reality much more wider. So Neptune is saying to us, we have to have our two eyes very wide open. One watching the outside to understand the world, and the other one watching within to try to understand our way of understanding the world. So usually humans, we are afraid of the subconscious because it's so free. We are so so the subconscious is so free that we cannot face it. It's so difficult to face it. It's so free, so wide that we cannot handle it. And our biology, our bodies were designed to control life. So we cannot handle something that is impossible to control. That's why most of us humans, we cannot face. We are afraid of facing the subconscious. So one of the things that makes us be so afraid of the subconscious is that we are afraid of losing control. And one of the teachings that the energy of Neptune has for us is that it's okay to lose the control, that we can swim. So the analogy to understand this is that you cannot hold the water in between your hands. You cannot hug the water. You cannot hold it because it escapes. But you can learn how to float in the water. You can learn how to be held in the water. And that's the analogy to understand this energy. And how can we put it in a very human way? That we have to allow ourselves to cry, to let the subconscious go out, to express it in the outer world, to let it all go, to allow yourself to express your emotions, not to hold it thinking that if you don't cry, you are imbalanced and it's all okay. You have to learn to cry. We all have to. And also, if some people believes, I don't know, we are spiritual, evolving beings, that we have already done all the things that we have to do, and we have faced everything, and I have healed all my history. If you need to cry again for the things that you thought you have healed, it's okay. It doesn't matter. Because we are not running to see who is the best one and who is much more in the center and not affected by emotions. Until we don't know how to swim, we are not going to be able to stop feeling that. So basically, you don't learn to swim watching the sea. You have to get wet.